Well, great. Welcome to the Next Generation Strategic Procurement webinar. My name is Lance Younger. I'm the CEO and founder of ProcureTech, and I'm joined this afternoon by a great panel. Blessen, Brish, Bhan, Dimas, and Alex from Thermo, Uber, Sanofi, and Ivalua will be joining us this afternoon to talk about their experiences and insights around next generation strategic procurement as well. We've got about an hour and a quarter of materials to run through with you. We're going to break the session up quite a bit, talking with the group here, as well as sharing some information from the most recent survey we've done across procurement leaders across the globe on the topic of next generation strategic procurement. As we go through the session, feel free, as always, to basically add any questions to the Q&A as we run through. What we'll do is we'll look to either chat about them as we go or bring them to bear as we talk about each of the panel sessions that we're running as well. The whole session will be recorded, and the recording will be shared afterwards as well, as will be the white paper that's been created around next generation strategic procurement as well. Worthwhile saying as well, and I'm pleased to see we've got a great model here. We've got 5 t-shirts to give out for love procurement, or about love procurement. Now, there was an observation that we'd give these out randomly, but I kind of think we'll give probably 4 of them out randomly, but we'll basically give one out to the best question or the most challenging question that we get as we go through the session as well. But yes, there's some t-shirts to be claimed as we go through here as well. And yeah, thanks, Alex, for modelling it for us today as well. I'm just jealous I didn't have my own, to be quite honest. So we'll make sure we sort that out for the next time, eh? Great. So let's dive in here with the content. So as I said, we're going to be talking about next generation strategic procurement. We're going to first of all talk about the importance of digitalization with regards to next generation strategic procurement. We'll talk about perceptions of some of the technologies that exist, some of the enablers that are linked to that as well. We'll break again for another panel session before talking about the manifesto. You know, what are pioneers and leaders doing in and around digital procurement, strategic procurement to move things forward, and then we'll close things off with a panel as well here as well. So diving in with the first sort of section here, basically when we were doing the survey, one of the things we always like to understand is what are the priorities for the procurement teams. And basically what you can see from the research and the respondents here is there are a couple of key things that are basically surfacing to the top. Now, typically what we see when we ask these types of questions is that people talk about risk or cost, depending upon where we are in an economic cycle or in a natural disaster as well. But what we've seen this time round, when we've got a bit more stability, relative stability in the markets, is that basically the number one driver of digitalization was improved business process agility and ability to make decisions as well. After that, yes, there was talk about compliance and risk and cost and cash flow. But for us, what was quite interesting is building resilience and securing supply has dropped relatively low down that prioritization list. It's not to say that people aren't working on those areas, but they're lower ranked than they were in other areas as well. And right at the bottom there, relatively close to the bottom, was ESG. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. And the difference between what pioneers are doing or what the leaders are doing versus basically what others are aspiring to do as well. And we've got the relative importance here as well and the impact of some of these changes as well on the right-hand side. So with that, we're going to dive quite quickly into a bit of a panel discussion and talk a little bit about for the group, what are we seeing, what are we experiencing, some of the most important drivers for investment over the next sort of 24 months or so. So I'll look first, Blessen, to you. You're top of the list here. It's probably a little of alphabetical order, but actually maybe not. But it'd be great to get your perspective on, you know, what's driving investment for you.
Yeah, absolutely, right. So for us, some of the most important drivers that we've been looking at or that we're affected by, of course, is helping to accelerate the speed of decision making. Of course, that, right, giving people trustworthy data that they can make decisions off of, or insights that they can make decisions off of. The other piece is around compliance and ESG. So, when I look at the other slide that you were sharing, it's very surprising to see that it seems like it's kind of low priority for a lot of areas. For us, right, it's a very high priority: responsible procurement, doing things right, having a positive impact on the broader society, right? So for us, I think it's those two, and then I would say the third is also around ease of use. Ease of use, not just for our internal stakeholders, but how do we drive a more improved experience for our suppliers as well? So anybody who's doing business and working with us from a procurement perspective, right, we don't want them to feel like it's a painful process. So that's some of the areas that we're really focusing on.
Yeah, yeah. And then, Dimas, for you, I guess moving to a different sector, are there different drivers or different priorities?
No, more or less, I concur with Blessen brought to the table. I would say that our priorities are mainly around all the values that are beyond savings, right? So we have all mastered managing savings and performance, or the classical performance, over the years. But we have an intensive agenda on ESG. So any, I would say, use case which is data intensive, it's a priority for us when it comes to supply chain decarbonization or supply chain resilience, which also came as a surprise, quite low in the list. For us, are still high in the agenda. And we know that the journey towards that is quite long, right? So getting the right data, getting the right insights. So we are investing heavily into that. And the second piece is also around user experience. But also for us, it's important for our own stakeholders, but also for procurement. We have a decentralized procurement organization. So we have a lot of users of procurement processes that are alone in their country without local support. So we really need to give them, an experience when using procurement tools, which is really, really seamless, and they can operate them without any local support whatsoever. So these two are mainly our priorities.
Yeah. And finally, Brish, for you, is it have you saying the same or slightly different? I guess often it reflects on where organizations are and their journey as well.
Sure. So totally aligned with what Dimas and Blessen said. Just to add on a couple of things. So we are a 15 years old organization, and sourcing is like around 80 years old. So we have gone through a journey wherein the organization was set up, function was set up, and when we were on the growth path, definitely a lot of demands came from the stakeholders here. So our investment is basically going with an agenda wherein we kind of remove bureaucracy from the system, give a better experience to the stakeholders, because we don't want to act as a blocker in the path where stakeholders kind of have certain plans to make things work, and we are just putting processes in place unnecessarily. So our investment is going into those processes, systems, tools, including people who can actually act fast, act accurately, and act better. So that is one thing that we are working on, and definitely user experience will come out of that. So when the user experience is better, and when I say user, I'm not just talking about stakeholder, it is about our suppliers also. Why should they stick to us? If we give a better experience to them also, definitely we will get the better service from them, better value from them, and could be the better price. So we are actually working towards that, and definitely with a lot of focus on sustainability now. Definitely that's an organization agenda, and it has come down to almost every single function. So that's where we are also kind of making investment in ensuring that we get the sustainable supplies, sustainable partners for us. So broadly, that's where our focus is today.
Yeah, yeah. And Alex, I mean, you've got a great view across the whole landscape. You know what I mean? How do you find clients and are engaging with you? Do they have a certain set of priorities, and is that changing, or has it changed over the last year?
No, I'd say as you brought up when you first highlight some of the stats, there's definitely a variance. We saw a lot more focus on supply continuity and transparency last year, and it kind of shifted back towards the cost efficiency aspect. I'd say the two overarching common themes that we see, and one is efficiency. to drive more automation as procurement is being asked to do so much more in more complex environments and typically without any more resources. That's the common scenario we see. How can they free up more of the capacity and drive more efficiency? That's still a big driver. And then the second to what Blessen said is around being able to make faster, more informed decisions. I think especially now what we see in particular is we're having to make decisions based and weighing a lot more factors than in the past, such as sustainability and cost, risk and other factors as well. And I think having that transparency to be able to optimize and understand the trade-offs has become a bigger priority. So that's definitely, I'd say, the second top one. And then there's a long tail of other drivers behind this.
Yeah, I mean, it does link a little bit to one of the questions we've got here, and the second question about challenges. But there's a question quite quickly here, Blessen, to you around, you mentioned data and getting data and it being trustworthy, and that obviously links into what Alex, you talked there about transparency and lots of different factors involved. How do you give people more trustworthy data or better data?
So over here at Thermo, right, we recently have put in a data governance program. So that's actually a focus area for procurement. So as part of a larger exercise where we're consolidating a significant amount of our procurement related data and supply chain data, along with that is data governance work, right? We have people who are focused on data governance. The scale of what we do, the number of systems that we operate out of, it's very large, right? Massive across many systems and across many geographies. So having data that is complete and accurate is a big priority. So we do have initiatives going on, right? We have Data Governance Council. We have, one of my team members is focused totally on data governance to drive initiatives over the next few years, right? This is not a, one time, let's clean up the data. This is an ongoing activity where we improve over time processes and the quality of information. So having a data governance focus to me is critical, right? We can't just keep doing analytics and then have people question the information. We got to keep pushing the envelope, get better quality information that people can really rely on and trust. Yeah.
And I do think it's one of those big challenges, and you have to have as you mentioned, it can't be just a project, it has to be an organizational shift to basically address the challenges as well.
Yes.
There's a second question here about sustainability and why procurement needs to step up. I mean, everybody said, okay, sustainability is important to you all, but why is that? And why, are you feeling that across every function within your companies? So is it systemic across your organization, and therefore it's prioritized that way, or is it just being driven by procurement?
In our case, it's really an holistic approach we have at the company. So we have really, I would say, ambitious targets as a company when it comes to sustainability. So it's really affecting end to end. So design of the products, distribution, et cetera. And why it's high on the agenda of procurement, it's basically because we are one of the main contributor to, for instance, the CO2 emissions, right? So it's 80% of our company's emissions comes from our supply chain. So we play really a crucial role here in reducing that. And there are obviously reputational effects into that, but also economical effects. So we are, having offsets and this type of cost that will impact also our financials if we don't deliver on this agenda. So it's, again, just not an economical impact, but also a value beyond the economical impact. So it's, I would say, high on the agenda at every level.
Yeah, got you. And Brish, just skipping to the second question here on challenges, do you have any significant challenges? What would be the top one or two in terms of implementing or looking at next generation procurement and technologies?
So I would say a couple of things that are kind of delaying things for us. I would say one, there are too many players, right? If we have to kind of deploy, say, artificial intelligence today in, say, the sourcing and procurement function, now which is the best solution, right? So there are too many. And I'm sure, most of people will agree that in the last 5 years, the number of companies who have come up, offering solutions in the sourcing domain, procurement to pay domain, they are like 500 to 700, at least I'm aware of. Maybe Lance, you would be knowing the number better than me, how many companies have come. So that's the biggest challenge, which one to choose and what is their, long-term vision. Because we have seen, acquisitions are also happening. We have seen the solution landscape also changing, and the speed of change is very, very fast. So it's very tough to figure out, is it the right time to do this, or shall we wait for some more time and see what's happening in the domain? Which is the best partner for us to choose? So that's another thing. And with AI coming, definitely questions around, the data privacy, etc., are coming up. Though there are, a lot of benefits. Yes, there are challenges being observed there also, because most of the AI functions are using the data of the company itself to generate, the intelligence and give it back to them. Is it really private, which will remain with them, or is it becoming public? So that is also coming as one of the challenge. And last, I would say definitely would be, the talent who actually need to be there to run these programs when this happen. So these are some of the challenges we do see. Yeah, we do have answer for some, but not for all. So yeah.
Yeah. And any additional challenges, Alex, that you see when it comes to, basically implementing at scale? You know what I mean? Make this change happen at scale.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things that we typically see, and honestly, about half our customers have used another technology before coming over, and a lot of them have tested ones as well as ones that we work with. But I'd say one of the big ones is around adoption, and by that, it's getting people to use it, but that can be a challenge. Or having suppliers actually, which is often a big challenge. But the bigger factor is the change management, getting people to actually do things differently, to take advantage of some of the capabilities that are available with some of these next-gen technologies. And that is often a big challenge, because as humans, what we consistently see is we tend to take technology to automate things exactly the way we did it before. But a lot of these technologies have a lot more potential, and that's really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to value. So how do you really educate and get people to actually do things in a better way, to take advantage of technologies, one. And then the second is, getting back a little bit to the data that has come up a few times. There's also, and to the point around all these different solutions and technologies out there, there is also the risk. And what we've seen is a lot of companies have tried different technologies, but then end up actually creating more issues from data quality. And from access, because you have to go one place to access one thing, you have to go somewhere else to access something else, and it makes it much harder to make kind of holistic decisions, and it can actually also impact users as well if they don't know where to go because there's so many different places.
I mean, I'd echo the previous point about the change that we're seeing now is it's not an incremental one, and often people can't visualize what a new digital solution would give, and don't have the capability to be able to deliver against it. So and there's a danger if you don't take advantage of those step changes in technology, that all you're getting is incremental change, which ultimately then means you don't deliver the ROI as well. So yeah.
Well, Lance, one thing I would want to add here, right, is a pretty significant challenge that I see, at least, is discerning the providers who actually have a solution to provide, right, and not selling a story. I think it's great if a company comes and says, "Hey, we want to co-develop something. We understand the business need, and we want to work with you to co-develop." But the number of times, I hear from somebody who says, "This is what we do." And it's not much more than, maybe an API into ChatGPT to give you an answer that's super generic, right? And that is, it's very frustrating, because this is such an exciting area, right? And then, the story and the possibilities of what's possible with Gen AI and these types of solutions, it really gets diluted by people who are just trying to get you to commit some funding for something, right? But it's not something substantial. And I think that's something that we really have to watch out for. And I think we all, as procurement people, have to make sure that we've got our smart hats on, right? Because there's a ton of these kinds of companies out there trying to basically, what I would say, it's kind of selling vaporware, right? It's not really giving you anything. That's something for us to watch out for.
And also selling often a roadmap that never gets realized, which I think is a big challenge if you're wanting alignment on your ecosystem, not just now, but in 3 years' time or 5 years' time. I'd agree with that as well. So there's a good question here from Vivek online here about how do you ensure that we get the value out of digital tools? That's obviously a challenge. How do you demonstrate the ROI associated with tools?
In our case, I would say it's kind of a first step we need to do when we need to convince our teams to invest. So we really need to demonstrate with the business case what's the expected ROI. So it's not possible for us to invest into any technology without business value behind and tangible business value in terms of economic terms. So for us, it's really exercise we need to do from the very beginning, trying to evaluate the potential benefits, and then obviously we need to monitor during implementation and after implementation that the promised ROI it's a reality, and if not, then maneuver, cancel, or reinvest if needed into the initiatives. But for us, it's really as mandatory as having data security in place or having any other of the different aspects.
I'll add one point to that question, right? I think engaging, this is a hard lesson learned, right? It's learned from not great experiences, but engaging users early as part of the framing of the business need before getting into the technology, so that they're advocates. Because if I'm going in and saying this is good and this is what you should do, it's going to come very differently from a fellow sourcing person or a category manager or a business partner. It's much better when the story comes from their peers instead of, oh, you're the digital guy. And of course, you're going to say use digital things. Not helpful, right? Get those people engaged early and often.
Yes, agreed. Great. Got a couple of questions, but I'm going to weave them into the next couple of sessions that we've got coming. So we'll keep us moving here. So, we've talked about a few of the key enablers that exist as you look at basically enabling or advancing strategic procurement. I was particularly kind of pleased with the outcome here that, one, you need to have leadership, and two, you need to have, a strategy and a roadmap that sits behind that. I mean, obviously, without that, you're not gonna have the direction, and you're not going to be able to cascade and advocate in the change as well. What was a little bit more sort of disappointing was that, down the bottom of the ranking, we kind of see being supplier centric lower. Now that might be just because it's relative to everything else, but for us, what we're seeing is that a lot of strategies that are successful, yes, concentrate on the user, but you have to concentrate as well on the supplier as a user of digital solutions, or indeed being involved from a strategic perspective as well. So we'll anticipate that will probably shift over the next couple of years as well. And on the right-hand side, we talked about some of the things that basically organizations need to be delivering in terms of the digital solutions here. And we talked a little bit about before the flexibility, the predictability, and the ability as well to embed Gen AI into those solutions to make sure that they're successful as well. Just doing a double click, and it's a little bit of what we've talked about just now. There is as well a kind of a divide between maybe what you can view a little bit as sort of generation 1 technologies and what we're seeing as generation 2 now. Undoubtedly, Gen AI has been one of those sort of sensations. It's been a natural evolution of everything that's been done around AI, but it's captured people's imagination. What we're seeing with Gen AI is that it's incredibly important that you lock in on a specific use case, And then in that use case, making sure that it's got the ability to scale as well. And similarly with process automation and conversational AI, we're seeing a step up. Now, with process automation, I think it's important to kind of articulate what process automation is and what it's not, because we already have a lot of great process automation embedded within great and S2P solutions. I think that what we're seeing at the minute is that being emphasized based around the importance of the user journey, the user experience, data flow as well, data transparency. And for solutions, like Ivalua as an example, that's embedded within the construct of the software. But we're also seeing now where it's not embedded, solutions that basically are orchestration platforms. So traditional ones like Appian and Pega and others, and procurement specific ones like Zip and Oro and Tonkean. There's a raft that have kind of emerged, but they're all coming together to improve the overall experience as well. And then if you drop down a little bit, some of the IoT, cyber, blockchain, quantum computing, they are very, very use case driven, and we're seeing a bit of application, but it's still lower. Interesting enough, some of these sort of edge technologies or advanced technologies are being applied in the space of ESG to solve problems that couldn't be solved before as well. So quite a bit of continued evolution, which is great. But I wanted to come back to the panel to talk about what should the priorities be. Oh, 2 seconds, sorry. What should the priorities be? And then also a little bit of time on Gen AI, because the session wouldn't be complete without that as well. If we just ask this first question again, Blessen, I'm going to come to you again. What should be prioritized as some of the most important enablers in your mind?
So for me, right, I would recommend, or at least my approach is prioritizing first off, what is the functional vision and where do we want to go, right? So knowing what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
But just a couple of specifics is also around to actually get some of the value that we're seeing with next generation procurement. And I'm specifically thinking about areas like risk or ESG, is having good data, right? Getting that foundational information accurate. Because a number of times I hear the conversation around Gen AI, and I get pretty concerned about the lack of awareness around, well, Gen AI can give you really bad, convincing results if you have garbage data behind the scenes, right? So that's an area that I would say is probably pretty critical to focus on, especially with the increased hype and thoughts and excitement around Gen AI. So for me, those are sort of 2 areas that I probably call out.
Yeah, and I would second that actually on that point, especially the first aspect, and this gets to the whole change management aspect. We have to be very careful about buying technology for the sake of technology because it's innovative. So you really need to understand what business outcome are you trying to achieve first, and then map how a next generation technology can potentially help you do that. And what are the behaviors that you're going to need to drive, and are people ready for that? How are you going to actually roll that out in an organization? But you really need to take it that way. And this is something that I'll say as a technology provider, it's been very interesting. Over the past 10 years, there's constantly a new technology that's been coming up. That's the latest buzz and at the peak of the hype cycle at some point. And we feel like you're almost pressured to say you can do each one, otherwise you're not innovative. Everyone wants you. And one thing I'll say is, we've seen a lot of RFPs in the past where the question will literally be, do you use blockchain? Do you use RPA? Like, there's no business context whatsoever. And I think that really reflects kind of the backward approach that's often taken. You really just need to look at what problem are you solving and see if a technology can potentially help that. Because otherwise you're likely to, one, be very disappointed and probably have like the least ethical vendor that just checks the box and everything. So it is really important to understand what you're trying to solve, what you need to change in the organization and what technologies could potentially help, first and foremost. And then secondly, again, think about, before you just latch on new technologies, make sure that it's going to fit into the overall roadmap that you have for digitization. Because otherwise, a lot of organizations have come because they've created this Frankenstein environment where they've just kind of jumped on every new trend, and then they have information everywhere and processes that are broken, and then they have to layer RPA on to fix the gaps that shouldn't have been there in the first place. So I think it's really important to always go from the problem you're trying to solve and understand what's the longer term roadmap that you want to have and how new technologies could potentially fit in that, and what that's going to, you know, involve as far as the people and your change management efforts.
Got you. I'd agree. Dimas, for you, any key enablers?
Yeah, I think just building on what just Alex said, I think that, you know, technology should rest on top of process and data, right? So we need to keep on investing on process excellence. So sometimes our value leakage is not to be solved with technology or with technology alone. It needs to come with process excellence. And sometimes we miss that part and try to bring technology for the sake of it. And on the piece on data, again, I think that we really need an investment in terms of upskilling on data management. So in our case, in Sanofi, and I think that's a recommendation, I think you can take this, that really you need to build that capability within procurement. So you need to have people with the sole mission to manage data, incorporate that as the day-to-day work of all your procurement associates, and invest also in the basic data management pieces. So invest in data engineering, invest in data quality, invest on the basic disciplines of data, which may not be as sexy as the data science piece, but really build on that foundation. Otherwise, the more advanced technology you put on top of that data, the more unprecedented and unnecessary insight you will receive. So I think that you really need to invest and wait for the right moment to put advanced technology on your data.
Yeah, exactly. That's the garbage in, garbage out issue. And I know MIT did a study a few years ago, and they found even the best AI algorithms underperformed ones that were considered subpar if they didn't have good quality data. So like, if you don't have the foundations, then you're inevitably going to find, you know, inaccuracies and disappointment. So it is very important to take a very strategic approach towards technology.
Yeah,
and I think it also it goes across procurement, right? So in most of, if you want to have effective decision making, you will probably need to get access to data which is not owned by procurement at all, right? So it's owned by supply chain, it's owned by your sales team, etc. So the ability to access data from different functional areas and the ability to share your data to other areas to have different use cases, that's key. And that's a lot of investment in data availability, data engineering, etc., rather than data science.
Yeah.
Right. And just to add a couple of thoughts here, while, you know, Alex mentioned very, clearly that we have to first prioritize or first figure out what we want to achieve. But I believe, you know, what we need to look at is what is it that we are actually solving for? Are we solving for the cost issues? Are we solving for, you know, the compliance issues? Or are we making, you know, our experience better, right? Having the right set of technology definitely is, you know, the enabler, but along with that, are we putting the right set of operating structure also in place, which includes, are we actually measuring the impact that is coming out of after all the investments have been put, after all the talent has been brought? Are we really getting the ROI? And are we actually doing a continuous improvement on that? Or have we kind of, you know, stagnated at a particular place? Things are solved, but now it's not improving. So I think putting those things in place is equally important. So the right selection of, you know, the whole source to pay process has to be looked upon, right? Shall we solve for contract? Shall we solve for P2P? Shall we solve for both? So that's how I would say would be important. You know.
There's a question here, which is a good one here from Piotr. In light of given investments, how do you invest in future procurement competency framework? How to move from a traditional concept of procurement organization into the future? So, you know, I was going to ask a sort of similar question, Dimas, to yourself, but you know, how do you define what great looks like in terms of your data organization, and how big is it? You know, it's the same. How do you define, you know, what the future procurement competencies look like, and how do you deliver them?
In our view, there's, I would say, different focus areas. So the data and digital skills you need for your digital procurement team are different to the ones you would require for the normal buyers or category managers. So we are really investing in having upskilling in terms of data management and technology for those teams, and also having what we call advocates in the different category towers. So we have people that on top of their job, they are advocates for digital technology. So we are upskilling them so that they also can translate their use cases into technology and needs. Whereas for our normal procurement team, we don't really believe that these, let's say, transformations will impact most of their work, meaning that it will really reduce the number of low value activities they do, and they can focus on the high value activities. So our upskilling, it's more on making them aware that they will need to take fact-based decisions from now on. They are no longer asked to do data analysis, to try to crunch numbers, but to take decisions. So it's more of an investment on things like business partnering, business knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. So it's more on the high end of the upskilling, rather than trying to have everyone with a high level of data literacy, understanding what Gen AI is, understanding what this algorithm does or whatsoever. So for us, we see these technologies really as an enabler, and the upskilling, it's more on I would say, the soft skill piece for our procurement teams, rather than the purely technical hard skills.
Yeah, and how do you scale it, if that makes sense? You know, because you talk, you know, these are key things you're talking about, but is it, are you applying that thinking to 5% of the organization, 10% of the organization, or is that the existing organization, or new? What's the magnitude of the change, I guess?
In our case, it's a new organization that we just built a year and a half that encompasses both digital and data management. Yeah. In the long run, it would be maybe more in the 5% range of let's say, teams. Yeah. But also the impact into that is that this will enable that our teams are more flexible. So we are no longer having people just focus on one category. We will have experts on categories, but also some pods of people, agile pods, that would be, you know, tackling one specific business case, one specific business need that we would have, because they would be equipped with, you know, technology, data, and so on, that would allow them to jump from one strategic priority to another in a more agile manner.
Yeah, okay. And I guess the same question to you, Brish. You know, you're kind of a little bit further on the journey than many. You know, how do you size it? How do you sort of scale the impact of the change?
So I would say, if I just look at, you know, the sourcing/procurement organization, the way AI is coming up, definitely it would have impact on the way things are done today. The impact might be more in the downstream process, wherein, you know, automation is easy, data is more accurate, it needs less of, you know, decision, right? So that's where, you know, the impact would be there. So jobs or roles might shift. The moment we talk about, you know, the sourcing function, or, you know, the contracting function, definitely the tools will act as enablers for the people. And in fact, I have tested some of them. For example, if I have to write, you know, the scope of work today, definitely I just have to ensure that I know certain keywords or metadata which I start punching in, and, you know, my work is simplified today in writing the scope of work. Similarly, writing the contract, you know, Gen AI can help in giving the fallback positions, you know, in case there is a pushback coming from, you know, the supplier. So that's where things would change. But what definitely would be required is, you know, taking the right decision, because the tools are still not matured. It will take its own time to give you the best of, you know, the advice, or best of, you know, the solution. So the human intervention definitely would be required to make the right decisions. And that's where folks from, you know, the strategic sourcing function, who actually kind of, you know, build strategies, do negotiations, you know, they will get enablers, but they still have to take, you know, those decisions. So that's what I see. Along with that does come, you know, certain risks. As I said, you know, earlier, data privacy would remain as a concern, at least for next, I would say, couple of years, could be months. So that is something which is there in the mind of all the, I would say, procurement leaders today. And that's where I think some of the tools are not being deployed as fast as they are happening in certain other areas.
Okay.
So yeah,
that's fair. That's fair. And just going to the second question here is, and Blessen, maybe to go to you, is what do you predict for the future of Gen AI? I mean, you touched upon it right at the start of the webinar here, but it'd be good to get your thoughts now.
Yeah, so I think that there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, right? It's super powerful for us to be able to leverage Gen AI, whether it's from an engagement perspective, right? Making it easier for people to engage with procurement. It's a huge opportunity, right? Or automate some of the more repetitive tasks in a more thoughtful way, right? So not as a bot, but I've seen different kinds of use cases there. What I would say though is I'm hoping that there's some kind of I wouldn't say consolidation, but some kind of rationalization of the provider space when it comes to Gen AI, because it does feel like I can't go to a procurement website without them saying something is Gen AI and it's not really Gen AI. So being able to distill that is something that I'm hoping that in the future it becomes easier, because it's like you got to have like a 2-hour conversation before you realize, okay, you've got like some automation and that's it, or this is not something that's actually a fleshed out business case.
And that's what I spoke about before, that there's this pressure that everyone feels they need to check the box. And I do feel like we've not jumped on the bandwagon of some other technologies in the past, like blockchain or even RPA, that we felt really weren't that relevant or had issues or could be solved in another way. I do think that Gen AI is different. It really is impactful. It's going to have a huge impact. We're investing heavily in it. Going forward. And honestly, anyone that's played with ChatGPT, like most of us probably have, it really is quite impressive what it can do, and it's only going to improve. I think going forward, a couple things. One is it's going to be much more embedded. So it's not an AI vendor. It's just going to be part of the software. A lot of it is going to be hidden. Some of it will be apparent. But it's going to be much more embedded in the technology. And I think to Blessen's point, that will help a bit instead of getting a whole bunch of different ones. I think you're going to primarily see upfront leveraging some of the existing technologies like ChatGPT being embedded with links to it. And over time, there'll be more specialized large language models developed for very specific purposes where they find they can just do it better. But I expect to see an explosion here because it really has a huge impact. And there's like so many use cases that we're actually rolling out, and it's impressive. I've not been impressed with the early stages of AI, to be honest. Before the generative came out, I felt it really was oversold, and certainly blockchain. But I think generative AI really is something different, and it's going to be part of everyone's life.
Mm.
I would just add, right, that something that's a little bit tangential to this is I think as a procurement function, right, we need to upskill our people to make sure that they are aware enough to discern if Gen AI is giving you a terribly, and I mentioned this at the start, right, a terrible answer, but super convincing, right? And people need to know and be able to figure out, wow, that's not right. That does not make sense. It doesn't align, because everything sounds so good, sounds very professional when you get when you're interacting with ChatGPT. And if people can't make that decision, we're going to make some really foolish mistakes. And it could be pretty serious mistakes given what some of our areas do, right? If whatever field we're in, you can make some really bad decisions, right, by trusting technology for technology's sake. If you're not really good with prompting Gen AI properly, if you're not feeding it good data that it can make good decisions off of, and if you just take it for what it's worth instead of being a little bit critical, and looking at things with a critical eye.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point. If I jump back in on that, it's a great point. People need to have the right expectations and be trained to do it properly, because there is a tendency that, technology will take care of that. And then we almost dumb ourselves down to not critically think if the output's there. I'll just give a funny example unrelated to this, but many years ago, I was in the military, I was a scout. And back then, GPS was relatively a novel concept. The military had used it. And I had a senior person on my team that they just gave us these little GPS, they called them pluggers. And he reported where he was. And then I actually saw him in the middle of a mission in a completely wrong spot. And I ran up, like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, my plugger said I'm here. I was like, I don't care. Can't you read your map? You're not anywhere near where the technology said you were. And he'd already gotten so reliant on the technology that the common sense and the basic skills were gone. So I think it has huge potential. It's going to make a lot of impacts, but you can't just automatically take it for granted and kind of give up the skills to critically think beyond it.
Yeah, agree. There's a question in here which, Brish, I may come back to you on, which is about, because you've talked about data a bit, but how does data fit into the strategy for next gen AI? Is it, and especially I guess when you talked a bit about the efficacy of some of the data and some of the decisions that may come out from Gen AI. Any particular thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a huge issue. It's that the garbage in, garbage out, and I think this gets back to the importance. It's not just, and we spoke before about data governance, and that's important, but it's also even taking it a step earlier, mapping out what is my technology decisions, what's the data implications, what's the architecture going to be, how can I unify that information? Because the more you have multiple supplier records, the more places that have partial information on a category, on the supplier, the more fragmented it becomes. And AI lives off good data and good insights. So we do have to be, we have to be very cognizant of that. I think it's going to make even more important, making sure that we have a very solid data foundation in place, and then the ongoing governance model to maintain that.
I'm going to keep us going here. We've got one more section to go through. And what we want to talk now a little bit about is high performing teams. So when we did the research on next generation strategic procurement, we also took a look at those organizations that were outperforming their peers and looked to identify what they were doing that was different to everybody else as well. So a couple of things that are worth calling out here. The first is that high performers are shifting their KPIs. And what we often see is that if an organization is flexible enough, they can shift the KPIs, more rapidly than every year to enable the organization to be able to focus on the right things as well. So obviously here from a high performing perspective, that's what's happening as well. Pleased to say as well, the upskilling that we've talked about is seen as being an imperative. I guess what you don't see on here, but you'll see when you read the full report, is the fact that people are upskilling ahead of recruiting net new people. So it's a concentration on, you've got some great people already. Let's make sure we can kind of upskill them as a priority as well. And then finally, right at the bottom here, is basically the high performers are predicting and doing more in the ESG space. So you remember right at the start, we talked about ESG sustainability being a lower priority across the people that we researched. However, high performers are putting it front and center and are doing something about it. And in turn, these different things from the survey results feed into what we believe is kind of a bit of a manifesto for next generation procurement functions, which is ensuring the leadership has a very clear vision and they lead by example, and we upskill and drive upskilling initiatives and continue to collaborate, and then move into areas of basically understanding and investing in Gen AI and processes, as well as data-driven, being data-driven as well. The final thing here is how you build the ecosystem, because what we've seen is a trend over the last sort of 15, 20 years to going from being a one-size-fits-all solution, which basically drift to a single suite, and then we've seen an explosion, as Brish you mentioned, in digital solutions that exist, and now what we're seeing is basically a bit of more natural, what's the best way of calling it, sort of going to the center ground. I mean, the way we often look at it is that there isn't a procurement operating platform out there, a single one that does everything that procurement wants. And what we're seeing organizations are tending towards, as in the survey, is either having a core S2P solution that basically is a specialist in that space with one or two connecting best of breed solutions, or indeed a kind of a portfolio of best of breed solutions as well. So that ecosystem is becoming more aligned to your point of differentiation or your company goals. The other interesting thing is about 14% of the people surveyed said they were building their own. Now, building your own could mean building our own our own data team, which is kind of what Dimas you referred to as building more data capability. It could also mean building your own process orchestration tool as well that sits on top of it. So whichever way, it's important to kind of get and have a clear vision on what you want your digital architecture and structure to be like as well. So final panel session here, and there's a couple of questions that I've got that I want to cover from the Q&A before we dive into it. It's basically just understanding from the panel what would be our immediate next step. But before you answer that question, I had two questions that ask the same question. And they're about ESG. So the first one probably covers it all. Is that if you're looking for ESG and ESG suppliers, how do you prioritize what you do first? For example, how do you prioritize basically looking at ESG, your existing ESG suppliers or others, or how do you prioritize tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers? How are you prioritizing ESG as, I'd imagine, an immediate next step? So, Blessen, I'll come to you because you mentioned it first. I asked you first, but I asked you first about it. So how do you prioritize it? Where do you start, within ESG?
For me, especially in our industry, right? We're in the life sciences, healthcare, health technology space, right? So it's not like you're going to actively just say, hey, I'm going to just introduce a new very big strategic, supplier, right? Because they're ESG, right? Or they hit certain metrics. Of course, we're always scouting and we're always exploring, but for us, we are focusing on our partners, our strategic partners, getting them and making sure that they're going to meet our expectations, whether it's sustainability related, human rights related, diversity, whatever else, right? We're looking at that. And we do that across our supply base to make sure that we do have a pretty compliant supply base. And then, yes, of course, right, we do scout for suppliers that meet certain expectations as well. But I would say if the question is, where do you prioritize, right, bringing on new suppliers versus the people that you already have, we work with the people that we have and say, these are our expectations from sustainability. This is what we need from you. We want to reduce emissions. Okay. Because for us, these are externally reported, expectations, right? This is stuff that we report to the government. This is content that we share with Wall Street. It's critical for us. It's a priority across the company, right? So, and I would say most of our partners know that, right? And the expectations are pretty clear now.
And maybe to go into the specific question, Dimas, what would be your immediate next steps?
Well, our immediate next steps would be, I think, having a diversified portfolio of initiatives. So I think that we will and would encourage to balance, high value implementations that would be more on the long run value delivery, right? That are transforming, for instance, in our case, our current S2P suite, improving that, etc., and combine that with more experimentational investments, right? So trying to start using advanced technologies like GenAI and others in a more controlled environment, in data sets that we know have good quality, that doesn't have data security topics around, so that we can, implement fast, learn fast, most probably fail fast, and then improve our strategy and our portfolio of initiatives. So I think a good balance between the two, because it enables us again to learn quick, but also to upskill people, right? So as long as you are involved in deploying such technologies, that's the best way, and the hard way, but the best way that you learn how to implement this technology and the value that they can involve. And also on that piece, I would say that I would really encourage to invest in having people from all your procurement teams and your stakeholders involved in the projects. So really ask for volunteers and advocates to join you in these implementations, because again, it's a great experience in terms of upskilling, and also it's, I think, a good recipe for for success and being able to detect value from different perspectives.
Brilliant. That's great. And then Brish, how about you? What would be your immediate next steps?
So nothing different from what Dimas just mentioned, having the right set of tool, having the right set of talent, either by hiring or through upskilling. So that is required. A couple of things that we need to keep in mind. This next step is, are we just solving for the current set of KPIs and being treated as just another function in the organization, or are we looking at changing our KPIs also, so that we really come as a valued function? Couple of thoughts. One, are we kind of doing a 360-degree program, right? Because sourcing sits on a lot of data, right? So can that data be utilized maybe in selling your company services? And we actually have been doing that. So I and a couple of my team members have been using that data and building connect with the sales team, saying, can we have a better approach when we buy and you sell, right? So can we do a 360-degree? So that's what we would like to do slightly more. And the second would be having the right set of supplier performance management program in place as a part of the next gen, not just relationship, right? It has to be performance, because if the performance is great, definitely relationship would be great. So that's the plan for us.
And then Blessen, I'll come back to you. I mean, I put you on the spot with the ESG question, but what are your priorities? And
yeah, very similar, right? But I would just take it a step back, right? And if I look at it a little philosophically, right, it's take a moment to breathe, ask questions of your stakeholders, of potential providers. So you're really taking time to learn and understand and listen to what people's needs are and what solution providers actually do. And then use those learnings to continuously evolve and advance, our technology roadmap, right? It's an iterative process, but, there's so much hype around what's going on right now that, I would say we need to take a few breaths, listen and learn, and then advance.
Great. And then Alex, coming to you.
I'll say, well, as a company ourselves, as a provider, obviously, we're really looking very closely on what are the use cases that are going to matter that we need to add. Kind of getting back to not just having technology for the sake of technology, but ones that are really going to have an impact. But if I would say for other companies and the procurement organizations, again, it comes back to just take a breath to what Blessen said and look at what you're trying to achieve, but also where you want to be 5 years from now, and how can new technologies in your overall digital initiative help get you to a place to where you have the right foundation for data. You have the flexibility, and that was something that was mentioned in one of the slides before too, but this is often overlooked too. Requirements continue to change. I mean, who knew 5 years ago that the level of scope 3 data that we'll have to capture? So if you're implement technologies and systems that have a few flex fields, that's not going to suffice when 5 years from now we have a completely new reporting requirement. How are you going to build in that flexibility so that you can kind of grow as the function, as the demands on your team continue to grow as well? And then lastly is, again, a lot of times companies, when they start off, will look at some low-hanging fruit, whether it's driving a certain amount of spend under management or certain processes that they want to focus on. But ultimately, you're going to want to get towards digitizing and having transparency everywhere. So how are you going to move along that path so that you can ultimately achieve that. And you don't actually make decisions that become a bottleneck when you're 2 years down the road and requirements change, you're more mature, and you have new ideas. So it's a big topic, but it's really important because otherwise there's a lot of effort, resources, and money spent on something that may not put you a step forward and a step back.
Yeah. And that's it's a great comparison as well to something that Dimas said about data and establishing the right data foundations. If you don't have a data strategy and understand how you're pulling that together, you can start in one place because it's seen as a priority, but not end up in the right end place as well. There is a question from somebody based from the audience who talks here a little bit about, imagine you're a greenfield site. You're going from no automation, no digitalization, and you're about to take the first step in that journey. What would be the biggest risk? Anything that you would call out that we've discussed, be the biggest risk in the first, and then how would you mitigate that risk in taking the first step?
Well, yeah, if I may, I think I'm coming from kind of a greenfield situation. So the reason why we created our department a year and a half ago is because we started a process of technology and functional autonomy within our organization. So our business unit was asked to have new processes, new technologies, let's say freedom to choose that. So it was kind of a greenfield. And our decision was, again, to invest on the most basic of things, right? So data and analytics. So building our data and analytics platform first, and then orchestrate everything around data. I think it's probably not, the most exciting piece, right? So people would expect you to bring latest technology, new suits whatsoever. But I think first have set a good foundation for the rest of use cases, and also has allowed us to have enough time for our teams to also digest all the changes around technology and data. So I think that one of the lessons now is that if you bring solutions with a pace that is not digestible by your users, you will fail for sure, right? And then it's difficult to distinguish whether the technology was the right one or the use case that you selected was the right one, compared to simply users not being able to adopt your technology. And that's a trap that we can all fail into with things like Gen AI or these new technologies, that you can implement that rather in weeks compared to the months and years that it was in the past. But for sure, most of the teams cannot digest a cultural change or a functional change in a matter of weeks. So you really need to plan this cultural change that goes head by head to your technology change.
I'm just going to open it up to the audience to hear to see if there's any final questions or that people would like to ask of the panel. We're lucky to have the panel here today. So one last chance for any questions. We've had some great ones so far, but if there's any questions, you could drop them in. We've got one last one that we haven't answered here, which was what ultimately does good data empower for you and your teams? So what does it empower? What does it enable you to do?
Better decisions, faster decisions, right? That's what we need.
And diverse decisions, because we're having to make decisions on so many different factors and balancing different areas. You just, you don't know. Is it a new compliance requirement? A great example, like Booking.com, when the invasion of Ukraine happened, and then suddenly they had to, the sanctions on Russia, and they had a lot of business in that part of the world. Suddenly they had to confirm if they were compliant, identify which relationships they had to sever to be compliant with EU sanctions. But going into a system in 24 hours, they could identify it. They didn't know that was going to be a requirement, but it allowed them to be nimble, to make a good, quick decision. For someone else, it's a supply chain risk, disruption. It could be a sustainability, improving carbon. We don't know tomorrow, but it will let you be agile and make the right decisions considering all the factors.
And here's another question that's dropped in: is what will be the top one or two things you do to drive adoption of digital tools. We've talked about the right data, we've talked about change management, we've talked about organizational upskilling, but are there any other sort of top tips for how you drive adoption of digital tools?
I'll say one thing up front that's really important during the evaluation process is getting all the stakeholders that'll be involved, getting that input before, because too often if their input's not captured and their requirements aren't understood and not taken into account, you may miss an opportunity to actually drive broader value, but second, you're going to get a lot of pushback later on. So that's definitely one of the key factors. And then the second I'd highlight, it's often overlooked. We're very focused on user adoption and for good reason. But actually what we've often seen with a lot of failed projects that have come to us is the supplier adoption is hugely important and often a bigger obstacle. So don't forget the suppliers, and you have to be very strategic because a lot of things sound great, but actually don't work. You just need to keep it simple. Just make it very simple for the suppliers, have communications come from you. Think if you were receiving a message from someone, who are you going to respond to? And what's going to make you just quickly adopt versus push back or check with your legal team. So that's a big topic. We don't have time right here, but don't forget about the suppliers too.
And to that point, right, I would say being able to articulate a very clear value proposition for each one of your stakeholders, right? So whether it's a supplier, whether it's a category manager or buyer or whatever else, right? Knowing why should they care and being able to articulate that right off the bat when you're trying to introduce a new technology is going to be critical.
I think a top-down approach works best here. At least we have seen some examples here when the messaging is coming from the leadership. Definitely people sometimes do take it seriously, or something is really changing and management is concerned, so let's do it, right?
And on that note, I'm going to draw things to a close here. Just do it is a fantastic way to end here. Thanks again for the panel, for your time and your kind of openness and the dialogue we've had. It's been great to bring the subject to life. Everybody who's kind of registered for the webinar and attended will kind of receive the report as well as the recording of this webinar as well. And the 5 lucky winners will be getting a Love Procurement t-shirt as well, which will be sort of randomly sort of allocated as well. So again, thanks so much for your time. If you've got any questions, feel free to push them through to me offline as well. And I look forward to speaking to you on our next webinar as well. Thanks very much, everyone.